Welcome back. All right, so into the season previews we tread yet again. This time we're going to talk about the Seattle Kraken. Seattle coming off of a surprisingly solid season in year two after a surprisingly bad season in year one. So now they have to show they're for real in year three, right? They can't afford that regression. And it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. Their roster has changed from the one that knocked off Colorado in the first round last season before bowing out against Dallas. So they're 46-28-8 last season. That's good for 12th overall. It was a real logjam in the Pacific down the stretch between themselves, the Oilers, and the Kings before things settled out. Their goals scored per game, 3.52 goals scored per game. I believe they were number one 5-on-5 with goals in the National Hockey League, and their goals against 3.07. They're probably going to want to bring that down, but overall the number's really, really solid again for a team only in their second year. Their power play, 19.8%. They're going to want to improve that, as well as the penalty kill. The penalty kill, 76.7%. So special teams didn't help them. The 5-on-5 play did. Now, of course, they made the playoffs for the first time this past season, and they won a round for the first time as well. So it's always nice to see a team get that out of the way early, get those first round jitters out of the way, and now it's just a matter of when are they going to win their first cup, right? Their salary cap space, there really isn't much to talk about here, $943,424. See, I say that, and yet I would love to have $943,424. But in terms of cap space, it's not very much in the National Hockey League currently. So their top five scorers this past season, McCann really hit his stride this past season. 79 games, 40 goals, 30 assists, 70 points. This year we'll find out, can he do it again? And there's going to be those who expect him to fall off and those who expect him to stay around the 40-goal range. I think at least 35 goals is very likely, but that is all going to depend on things falling his way, right? Vince Dunn had a great year too, 81 games, 14 goals, 50 assists, 64 points. Just a ridiculous season for Dunn. I always knew that he was a very good defenseman, but even I was surprised at how good he was this past year. Eberle, 82 games, 20 goals, 43 assists, 63 points for him. He's been solid since the Seattle Kraken picked him up. Beniers, 80 games, 24 goals, 33 assists, 57 points. And Beniers is a really good two-way forward, and I think this is going to be a fantastic second full season in the NHL. He did have 10 games at the end of the season prior. Of course, he played the NHL as well. And so I would expect Beniers' numbers to go up. So even if McCann's numbers drop off a bit, I would expect Beniers' numbers to go up. Yanni Gourde, 81 games, 14 goals, 34 assists, 48 points. As this team gets better, I would expect Gourde's importance to drop off a little bit, but he's still going to be a key veteran with the experience, and he does provide some offense there as well. Their goaltending was interesting this past season because when you look at win-loss record, Martin Jones was the best goaltender they had. He goes 27, 13, and 3 in 48 games. So why didn't they re-sign him? He had an 887 save percentage, plus the lack of cap space made it difficult. And then there's a goaltender who was third on the depth chart who I think has earned a spot at the number 2 role. But Jones's numbers outside of his save percentage were great, and we'll see if he can continue that in Toronto this coming season. Philip Grubauer, on the other hand, 39 games, 17, 14, and 4, so his record wasn't great, but he had an 895 save percentage, so his save percentage was better than Jones's. Meanwhile, Joey Decord played 5 games, had a 2-1-1 record, 900 save percentage, and with the way that he played for the Firebirds in the playoffs, he earned himself a shot at the backup job in Seattle. He's been waiting his turn patiently, and so we'll see how things go for him. And of course, Drieger's still there. Drieger could end up being a backup for them, but I think that job's going to end up being Decord's. Drieger, there's just the one more year left in his contract, which, due to injury that he suffered and then his play not being where he'd want it to be, really hasn't had a chance to show what he can do in the NHL since signing that deal. So the channel seems to like the idea of Seattle staying in the top 4. 15% of the channel said first or second in the division. 71% said third or fourth. 12% had Seattle at 5th or 6th, and 2% had them 7th or 8th, which, again, thinking about some of the teams in the Pacific, yeah, they're not finishing 7th or 8th. The hits leader was Adam Larsson, 222. He had a career year, and he also led in block shots with 173. So Adam Larsson has really come into his own as a defensive defenseman who also provides some offense for the Seattle Kraken. Most posts, Beniers and Eberle tied for the lead with 7. So not a lot of guys hitting posts apparently for Seattle. Pretty accurate shooting considering how well they played 5-on-5. Now, when we look at the next one, I put Riker Evans up there. Looking at their prospect list, I thought Riker Evans played really well again in the playoffs for the Firebirds. I almost said Freebirds. Let's turn this to wrestling all of a sudden. But yeah, Riker Evans should be playing for the Seattle Kraken this fall. It will be interesting to see if he does end up starting the season on their roster or if he gets there during the year. But he absolutely looked great for them during the Calder Cup final. So we'll see if that's got him a job. The fantasy sleeper, I went with Kyler Yamamoto. I think Yamamoto needed a restart to his career. He should be pretty comfortable playing in Seattle. And so we'll see how things go for him there. The MVP, I went with Beniers. For me, it was between Beniers, McCann. I can make an argument for Grubauer as well. If Grubauer can get his save percentage above 900, if the defense in front of him is playing a little more tightly than what they have, honestly, I think that Seattle's numbers could get even better when it comes to the defensive side of things, and maybe they actually garner more points. But yeah, I go with Beniers as the MVP because I do believe that he's going to become an elite two-way forward in the game and could very well be their leading scorer this season. The schedule is not easy for Seattle out of the gate. 7 of their first 10. So out of their 10 October games, 7 of them are on the road. So a couple of road trips in here that will tell us whether or not Seattle's, in good shape to repeat another 100-point performance or if they're going to have their struggles. But overall, I think they're in a good spot. Their additions, Belmar comes in as an older forward. Yamamoto, as mentioned before. Dumoulin's coming off of a rough year in Pittsburgh. Not going to lie, but Dumoulin at his best was a very good defensive defenseman, and maybe a move to Seattle helps him. Connor Carrick's been added. Of course, he's a depth player. The exits are interesting because you got Geeky, who has left the team. He's in Boston. Sprong is gone as well. I think Sprong's the one that surprises me the most that Seattle hasn't kept around because he's a good goal scorer. So he seems to be bouncing around the league a bit. All he does is score. Susi, of course, is headed to Vancouver. Donato is exited as well. I'm mildly surprised with Donato too. But again, there's only so much money to go around, and you've got to be smart with that money when you've got a guy like Beniers who's going to need to get a raise soon enough, right? Martin Jones, as mentioned before, he's exited the team. He's headed off to Toronto. And sadly, Jonas Donskoy, his career very likely done. He didn't play at all this past season for Seattle. So with the Seattle Kraken, it will be interesting to see how the new additions fit in and whether or not the blue line is where they want it to be, right? And again, it was this past season. Can they repeat? We're about to find out. Eberle, Wenberg, Schultz, Drieger are among 2024 UFAs. So there are a lot of UFAs next summer. So if this season somehow went south, Ron Francis would have a lot of options when it comes to rentals at the deadline. And he may very well get creative about players who don't want to stay long-term, or maybe the team isn't interested in investing long-term in players. So they may be busy come trade deadline, no matter where they are in the standings, dependent on certain contract situations, because you don't want to lose players for nothing, right? They defeated the Stanley Cup champions in their first playoffs. So this is an NHL first, that a team comes into their first ever playoffs and knocks off the defending Stanley Cup champions in that first round. So kudos to the Seattle Kraken for them on that, and that's definitely, a point of pride that they can take into this season. And really, in all honesty, I would be very surprised if that ever happens again. They gained 40 points in year 2. They had 60 in year 1, 100 in year 2. I don't see another 40-point improvement. I don't think they're going to have a 140-point season. I know, hot take. But for Seattle, it really is about staying in that same range, 100 to 105 points. You have to think Calgary could have a bounce-back year. Vancouver has been lingering around, and they were one game above 500 by the end of the season. Maybe they can get a little bit better this year. But for Seattle, if they can just keep things steady, and if they can still find those goals and maybe improve their special teams numbers, there's no reason to think that they're not going to stay above the playoff line. They gained goals by a ridiculous amount. They had 216 goals in year 1. They had 289 in year 2. So that's insane. That's almost a goal per game more that they were scoring. And it's interesting because it was still Hackstall behind the bench, And when the team wasn't playing well, there was a lot of, well, Hackstall's not very good. And team got better, and there was a lot less criticism of Dave Hackstall and his coaching. They went from 285 goals against to 256. So this, to me, is still one number that I think they want to drop. I think the 256 goals against is something they want to drop. That's why it's interesting to me that Soucy was let go, Dumoulin was brought in. So we'll see if there's a difference with Dumoulin over Soucy, since they both have a similar skill set, right? But again, with Dumoulin coming off a rough year, one thing with Seattle, they've already shown that they have some of what Vegas had, where a player might be meandering in an organization, goes to Seattle and hits it. Sprong being an example of that. And of course, another example of that would be Ellie Tolvanen, who they picked up on waivers from the Nashville Predators. So the Ellie Tolvanen pickup was definitely a smart move on their part, and it's been a success story. He doesn't end up in the top 5 scorers. Maybe he does this year. Might be a good fantasy sleeper pick, too, if you're not sold on Yamamoto. Although I don't know how much I would qualify Tolvanen as a sleeper after the season he put up with Seattle post the pickup on waivers. So Hackstall, I think, has silenced most doubters when it comes to his ability to coach the National Hockey League level. That being said, I know that if things get off to a rough start, if the road games in October are not great for them, we'll probably start hearing some negativity towards him again, because that seems to be the standard that immediately it'll be, well, we've got to do something about the coach. And Shane Wright is still a question mark. So what's interesting to me with Seattle is they drafted Shane Wright 4th overall. They really made a really strong media push to, have everybody get to know Shane Wright. They made a big deal of him signing his entry-level contract. And then he kind of bounced around a bit. He played some games in Seattle. They found a way to get him some games in the AHL. He played in juniors as well. So does he play in the juniors or does he play in the NHL this year? They're not able to send him to the AHL yet again because of his young age. I think that's where he belongs. He was in Coachella Valley for a lot of their playoff games, and there's some promise there, and I think that's the best spot for him. But again, as we've discussed a few times over now, because of the agreement that the NHL has with the Canadian Junior Leagues, they can't send him to the AHL. They'd have to send him to juniors, where I don't think that would necessarily help his development. I think he's already graduated from juniors. So we'll see if he ends up getting a 4th line spot. We'll see if they do end up having to send him to juniors, or if it's a similar season to last year. Now, I was fine with how they were with him last year and sending him around and having him sit, but 2 years in a row of that might be a little bit much. So we will see what they do. Let me know what you guys think. What do you think they do with Shane Wright? Does Beniers end up as their number 1 scorer this year? Can they maintain what they did last season? Will they fall back? Or, as 71% of the channel feels, they're going to stay right in about the same spot. Let me know your thoughts and why you feel the way you do in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.